Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I want to thank everybody who's watching at home, and of course, our panelists here who are joining us for a very important conversation. I'm Giffords Senior Advisor Ryan Busse. I have the honor of sharing the virtual stage with Colorado's incumbent Senior Senator Michael Bennet, who I respect a great deal. Senator Bennet is running for re-election, and this fall, obviously in November, and Giffords PAC is very, very proud to endorse him in his campaign. I'm also joined by Vic BENCOMO, the president of Colorado chapter of Giffords Gun Owners for Gun Safety, and a fellow Gun Owners for Safety member, Emily ENGELHAUPT. We're here to discuss why addressing gun violence is so important, and of course, why Senator Bennet is the best candidate on the ballot this November to continue advancing all of our important gun safety priorities in Washington. Before we get into this, I'd like to share just a little bit more about Senator Bennet. He's represented Colorado in the United States Senate since 2009. And over the course of that career, he's garnered a reputation for working with both Republicans and Democrats to address some of our most urgent issues and challenges in our nation. He's obviously also very dedicated to reducing the devastating impacts of gun violence and the dangerous nexus between domestic violence and guns. And Senator Bennet ran for president in 2020. I think a lot of us, and certainly me, have been very invigorated and impassioned by his straightforward talk and his speeches on the floor. They've been great. And he previously served as the superintendent of the Denver Public Schools. And while he's not trying to make the world a better place and tackling the issues of the day in DC, he lives in Denver with his wife and his 3 daughters there. Senator Bennet, hello. Thanks so much for being here. I wondered if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. I am really grateful to be here, and obviously incredibly grateful for the endorsement, the Giffords endorsement. It means a lot. It means a lot to me. And I just thank you for what you're doing, what Ryan and Vic and Emily, what Vic and Emily are doing for here in Colorado. And obviously, thanks to Gabby for everything she's doing. My oldest daughter, it's hard to believe this, she was born the year after Columbine. You know, she's now 22 years old, and all of my 3 daughters, as a result of that, have grown up in a world that my generation didn't grow up in, scared to go to school because of what happens every several months, it seems, in this country. I certainly felt that as a parent, but also, as you mentioned, as a superintendent of the Denver Public Schools. And I have come to believe that our parents deserve to live in a country where they know their parents care enough about them to actually do something about gun violence. That's why this organization is so incredibly important. And I think if we are going to do anything about it, it's going to take a movement, one we have to build door to door, house to house, by following the example of the people on this call. And Ryan, I have absolutely no doubt that if we do that, we can fix our broken government in Washington and make progress on these issues.
Well, thank you so much, Senator. I personally have 2 boys in junior high and high school now, and we worry every day about them, and they worry about themselves too.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate your dedication. And obviously, we're at Giffords, we're very lucky to have an inspirational leader who has shown tremendous courage standing up. And I'd like to introduce everyone to our founder, Gabby Giffords. Gabby is just a tremendous inspiration.
I'm Gabby Giffords. I'm from Tucson, Arizona. January 8th, 2011 changed my life forever. I was a congresswoman. I was shot in my head while meeting with my constituents. I couldn't walk. I couldn't talk. I watched gun violence destroy too many lives. After the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School, I've said, enough is enough. I founded a group called Giffords. We are on a mission to end gun violence.
Thank you so much, Gabby. For all of us who are lucky enough to know and be around Gabby, she's just a tremendous inspiration. And what you can't help but be struck by her hope and her dedication to bring a brighter tomorrow. And Gabby, not going to let you off the hook. I wonder if you could maybe do a bit more of your inspiration magic here and say some words about that.
I've known the darkest of days, days of pain and uncertain recovery. But confronted by despair, I've summoned hope. Confronted by paralysis and aphasia, I responded with grit and determination. I put one foot in front of the other. I found one word and then I found another. My recovery is a daily fight, but fighting makes me stronger. Words once came easily. Today I struggle to speak, but I've not lost my voice. America needs all us to speak out, even when you have to fight to find the words. I'm also in a second fight, the fight to stop gun violence. It's also a fight forged by tragedy and pain, a fight that can change lives. We are at a crossroads. We can let the shooting continue, or we can act. We can protect our families, our future. We can vote. We can be on the right of history. Please join us in this fight. Thank you very much.
So thanks. We're all inspired by Gabby every day, and we're very lucky to have her. And I'd like to introduce now two of the other panelists here today, people that I work with at Giffords, Vic BENCOMO and Emily ENGELHAUPT. I'd like them to introduce themselves. Vic.
Sure. Thank you, Ryan. Senator Bennet, thank you so much for the opportunity. Gabby, it's always an inspiration to hear you talk. And you're one of the reasons why I think many of us are here doing what it is that we're doing. My name is Vic BENCOMO. I'm the president from the Colorado Gun Owners for Safety chapter here in Denver. I spent 21 years in the United States military. I'm a father, I'm a hunter, concealed carrier, proud sportsman. My children, both boys, have had a firearm in their hands since they were able to shoot a BB gun at 4 or 5, and really enjoy the sports of having the ability to use firearms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vic. Emily.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Senator Bennet. My name is Emily ENGELHAUPT, and I'm a member of Giffords Gun Owners for Safety. I grew up hunting in Wisconsin and moved to Colorado about 10 years ago. And I am inspired by Gabby Giffords' strength and her courage and her ability to turn tragedy into triumph. And I am confident that we will be successful in continuing to reduce gun violence. I came to Giffords as a nurse and a concerned aunt. I'm tired of the constant gun violence, and it was really important to me that my voice as a gun owner was heard. I don't agree with the NRA and the gun industry's rhetoric. And so many of you watching today have stories of how gun violence has affected your own lives. And I encourage you to continue to use your voice and your strengths to help us end gun violence. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you both, Vic and Emily. It's great that you're standing up and offering your voices. And we'll come back and chat with you in a few minutes about your experiences and what you're doing. But we're going to show now a quick video highlighting a group that Giffords has established and that you are both working hard on, Giffords Gun Owners for Safety, and the work that everyone is doing to organize gun owners like both of you to advocate for common sense. I'm proud to be one of those gun owners who believes that common sense and responsibility must go hand in hand with gun ownership. So let's have a look at that video.
I'm a gun owner.
I'm a gun owner.
I'm a gun owner. And we're committed to gun safety.
Gun ownership is woven into our history as a country, a fundamental right for generations of people from all backgrounds and political affiliations. Giffords Gun Owners for Safety unites a community of hunters, sport shooters, and collectors who understand the need for common sense gun laws to help keep us all safe. As gun owners, we value the right to own a gun and also understand our responsibility in ensuring all guns are used and stored properly. It's time to use our voice to push for solutions that will save lives and preserve our rights. We believe the Second Amendment is an important right. We also believe our communities should be safer from gun violence. If you only listen to the corporate gun lobby or partisan politicians, you'd think these two values are at odds. But gun owners from all 50 states are joining together to say that gun rights and gun safety go hand in hand. Responsible gun owners across the country are showing that we're not as divided as we seem.
As a responsible gun owner,
I am committed to gun safety.
join us.
Join us.
Join us in the fight for gun safety.
Thanks so much. It's great to see gun owners coming together to advocate for responsible gun ownership. And I didn't say this on the lead in, but I was a firearms executive in the industry for 25 years. I gave up a career that I thought would be my dream career. And I've written a book, and sometimes doing this work means that we have difficult conversations and that we have heavy lifts. But people like Vic and Emily, inspire me, along with obviously Gabby's leadership. And now more than ever, it's important that responsible gun owners, like what you just saw in the video and what we're speaking about here today, take action. And we encourage action on pivotal legislation before Congress. The Senate is expected to consider reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act very soon. And this would address important loopholes that allow perpetrators of domestic violence to access firearms, something I think we can all agree is a very bad thing. We need to encourage all of our legislators, and Senator Bennet is certainly on board here to support this life-saving legislation. And I'm going to ask you to text something here in just a second. So you might want to grab a piece of paper or your phone and note this down. But if you could help us fight to win this effort, text VAWA, as in Violence Against Women's Act, VAWA, to 34131. And we'll rattle that off again near the end of the call here, but we would love to have you do that and help us join. Now we're going to go to the man of the hour here, Senator Bennet. Senator, I'd like to start by asking you, during your time in the Senate, you've been a champion for many things, including enacting universal background checks and closing the loopholes that we just talked about, that the Violence Against Women Act would close. Unfortunately, even though these are very common sense and responsible policies, they've been blocked every single time by your Republican colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And I wondered if you could talk a bit now about how policies like this would help reduce gun violence across our country and how important that is to you. And additionally, if you're reelected, maybe what are some of your other priorities in this policy realm that you'd like to see considered and help get passed?
Thanks. Ryan, like you, I live in a Western state, and here in Colorado, we've actually passed laws around universal background checks and extreme risk protection orders, just to take that as an example, which is, what the Violence Against Women Act in part is about. And unfortunately, the reason why we've had to pass these laws, or we passed these laws, is that Colorado has had too many instances of gun violence, from Columbine to the movie theater in Aurora and a lot of other, and Boulder most recently. And what I know from having worked on those initiatives is that they've made a difference. In the background checks alone, every year there are a few people, a small percentage of people that try to buy a gun in Colorado, and they're prevented from doing it, but they're domestic abusers. They're people that have committed violent felonies. It is impossible to argue that Colorado is not safer with those folks not having access to firearms. And that's why I believe it's so important for us to pass this at the national level. I mean, it's one thing for Colorado to do it, but it's really important that the nation does it, so you have the benefit of a national approach to this work. And if Colorado, a Western state, can do it, there's absolutely no excuse for the United States Congress not doing it. And so in the Senate, if I have the chance to go back there, I'm going to continue to fight to pass common sense universal background checks. I think it's important to ban high capacity magazines, which we've done here in Colorado, and we finally get weapons of war out of our communities. And in addition to all of that, we need to address the epidemic crisis of mental health in this country. But that alone is not going to address issues around gun violence. We need to address it directly. And I'm looking forward to the chance to fight for that common sense legislation that I know I can defend in Democratic, Republican, and independent parts of my state of Colorado. And if I can do it here, others can do it in other parts of this country.
Well, thank you so much, Senator. I'm going to correct you on one thing. You said if you get to go back, we're here today. We're going to make sure it's when you go back.
I appreciate that.
I know it's a tough race, and we all need to stand up and do our part. But it's critical. We're going to make sure that happens.
Thank you,
Vic. You're there in Colorado. You've heard the senator touch on these issues. You've been personally engaged. You've stood up. I wondered if you could talk about what got you involved, what inspires you, why are you doing this? Maybe tell us a little bit about what's going on in your life and why this is important.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan. So, I retired from the military after 21 years of service as a combat medic, which is a corpsman in the Navy. When I left the service, I became very disenfranchised with the amount of gun violence that I was seeing on the streets of America. And, so more so was extremely saddened with the number of veteran suicides that were occurring, especially when they were using a firearm. Often when someone thinks about gun violence, they think about a mass shooting. But as the senator alluded, gun violence takes many forms: domestic abuse, street crimes, and as I mentioned before, suicides. And unfortunately, veterans are committing suicide at an alarming rate, especially when they're using firearms. Nearly 6,000 veterans commit suicide every year. And over the last 10 years, that's been 60,000 veterans. That's more veterans killed by suicide than killed in action from all the wars combined since Vietnam. So you asked me what piece of legislation really got me involved to fight against gun violence. I'd have to say the Extreme Risk Protection Order, or otherwise known as the red flag law. This is a provision where if it allows the temporary removal of a firearm if someone is displaying a potential harm to themselves or to others. Really on more than one occasion, my phone has rang, and on the other end, there's a veteran in crisis. And before the red flag laws in Colorado, there was no place for them to turn. I was the one that was taking their firearms. I was the one driving them to the hospital. I was the one who answered their call. But with 60,000 veterans dead from suicide over the last 10 years, how many of those phone calls were never answered? So that's what motivated me to be a champion to fight against gun violence.
Well, Vic, amazing, and thanks for standing up. Emily, you've heard the senator, you've heard Vic, you're there in Colorado, you're a nurse, you grew up in a hunting family, and I wondered if you could talk about the impacts this issue has had on you and your patients and your everyday life.
Thank you, Ryan. So many of my patients are affected by gun violence in different ways. So some are survivors of gunshot wounds and endure the trauma and the complications from those injuries themselves. And then others are seeking help with PTSD, depression, anxiety from being involved in shootings. And then some are looking for advice on how to keep their children safe. And then others are dealing with just tremendous amounts of grief and stress from losing a loved one or family member to gun violence. So as a nurse, while helping these patients, we really follow two fundamental principles. And that first one is safety. We continuously strive to provide the safest care for our patients every day. And this can center around how to keep your guns safe in your own home if you have young children, or how to keep guns away from yourself or other loved ones when they're struggling with suicidal or perhaps homicidal thoughts or plans. And a second principle we always like to follow is evidence-based interventions. And just as with the COVID pandemic, our interventions are changing as the research is updated. And I think it's really important to pass legislation to provide funding for gun violence prevention and research. So as frontline healthcare workers, we can provide those interventions to patients and to increase the safety in our community. I remember being a new nurse and I was caring for a 14-year-old who had survived a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He didn't have a very good support system, and I felt incredibly helpless at the time because I didn't know what resources were available to him and his family to help him cope through that. So I want to see those tools provided to frontline healthcare workers. And as we develop more gun violence interruption strategies and programs in our communities, we will be able to see decrease in gun violence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily, for doing the work and leading by example, being here with us today, obviously, but of course, just doing this in your everyday life. It's really important. Senator, you've heard from two of your constituents. They're on our panel here about why they are motivated by this and what role this plays in the communities of Colorado. And I know, we all know it's incumbent on our leaders to find the same sort of courage to act on this issue. Many folks, elected officials on the other side of the aisle, including some of your extreme Republican opponents, they claim to be pro-Trump warriors. They often say that this is an all or nothing game, that we can't respect the Second Amendment, that we can't be pro-gun. We can't be somebody like Vic, who values guns, self-defense, hunting and shooting with his kids, and also support responsible, common sense legislation at the same time. Somebody like me, I ardently believe that's not true. But I wondered if you could speak to your experience as somebody who I think believes, as we do, that being pro-gun also means we must be pro-responsibility and do both things at the same time.
Yeah, and Ryan, I think most people believe that. My state, as I mentioned, is in the state where Vic and Emily live. We're about a third, Democrat, Republican, and Independent. We've got a very diverse electorate here, and the majority of people here support the kind of legislation that we're talking about, and they understand that the Second Amendment protects the rights of law-abiding citizens to bear arms, but that there are also reasonable limits, and these include things like universal background checks, which we know are constitutional, red flag laws, which we know are constitutional, limits on magazines, which we know are constitutional. I'm not just saying that. I know that because courts have looked at these questions. But, on the absolutist question, Ryan, I've talked about this on the floor of the Senate before. After one of these shootings, I remember a radio talk show host saying that this was just the price of freedom. And what I said on the floor was, what a terrible thing to accept for our kids and for our grandkids. The idea that somehow the founders of this country, created a constitution that would not allow us to prevent our children from being terrorized by gun violence in their schools or in their communities. And that's not what the Constitution says. That's not what the Second Amendment says. We can put reasonable restrictions on guns, and this absolutist position just doesn't hold any water with the Constitution, doesn't hold any water politically. And if you find yourself saying that's just the price of freedom, I think that's just saying we're giving up on our responsibility as citizens in this democratic republic. We need to do better than that. And that's, in some ways, I think why Gabby Giffords is such an inspiration to me, is she has taken this tragedy that she suffered herself while she was just trying to serve the public in Arizona, and she's become a warrior to make this country a safer place. And I believe she's fighting on behalf of the Constitution. I think she's fighting on behalf of the constitutional rights of every single American. I'm proud to have the chance to support her work.
Well, thank you so much. We're obviously proud to have you fighting in the Senate for responsibility and common sense. And I personally like to remind everybody that one of the founding fathers, John Adams, said, "Our Constitution was made for a moral people, and it is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." In other words, all of this stuff without responsibility is not going to work. So obviously it's common sense laws and common sense views like yours that need to prevail, and we need to have you there. So Vic, you've been through these battles and you're volunteering, and I think you probably often hear things like the NRA represents all gun owners, meaning they represent you and they represent me. And you know that the NRA spends millions of dollars to try to, spread conspiracy theory and hatred. And I wonder what you might say about to somebody who says the NRA speaks for you or for all gun owners.
Thank you, Ryan. The NRA and the gun industry quietly changed the narrative on how Americans perceives gun ownership. Early on, they realized that by invoking fear, pointing out our differences, spreading distress among the social and economic classes allowed for an opportunity to radicalize gun ownership. Gun ownership has now become one's identity versus a tool for hunting or sport shooting. I often hear people say, well, that law won't make a difference in this area, or that law would never have changed the situation that occurred this time. And though that might be true, what we're about, what this organization is about, it's about safety, gun safety. Safety in itself is not a cure. It's an art. It's an art at looking at what's working, applying the best industry standards for the greater good of society. It's about creating a responsible culture where we identify what our shortcomings are and then we fix it. The NRA and the gun legislators have tainted our ability to make the right decisions as a society. So I can say this, I believe in the Second Amendment, and I think we all do, especially for a gun owner. The NRA does not speak for me. I alone speak for myself. I have a moral compass. I have a duty and a responsibility as a gun owner, not only to ensure that I'm safe, but to ensure that others are safe as well. So when it comes to enacting gun safety legislation, the NRA has this notion that you indicated of no compromise. Well, with thousands dying every year to gun violence, that is no longer a viable position. The pendulum can shift left or right in any way. But if we as gun owners want to continue the sport that we like and utilizing the firearms that we like, there has to be a compromise somewhere. And it's not a compromise to the Second Amendment. It's a compromise to ensure that there's safety. So that's why it's so important to re-elect and elect officials that see gun violence as an epidemic and are willing to make a change. So I can honestly say my friend, Senator Bennet, has a long history in the fight against gun violence. So let's re-elect Senator Bennet, let him continue the fight against gun violence, and let's make this happen.
Thanks, Vic. I'm with you. I'm thinking Senator Bennet probably is with you. Responsibility does not preclude us from, it doesn't mean we're anti-gun when we're pro-responsibility. Those two are hand in hand, they're intertwined. And I appreciate you standing up and saying the truth and doing it passionately. Thanks. Emily, I wonder if you have anything to add here before I'm gonna hand it back over to Senator Bennet here in a moment. But the tragedies that you see every day, how does it affect your family, your work? I know you've spoken about that a little bit, but why do we need to re-elect Senator Bennet, and how do you think it impacts people's day-to-day lives, including yours?
Thank you. My nieces are growing up in a culture that is beginning to normalize gun violence. Children are learning active shooter drills in a place that is supposed to be their safe haven, where they can grow and learn and experience, not to be scared of bullets. Teachers should be armed with knowledge and training on how to recognize and provide help and resources to troubled students and their parents. And this constant providing tertiary responses to gun violence, such as first aid and emergency treatment in the hospitals, and then sympathy for the families affected by the loss of a loved one. We have to work on prevention strategies. Colorado has recently implemented an Office of Gun Violence Prevention through the Department of Public Health and Environment, and I'd love to see that replicated in other states as well. So we as gun owners, we must use our voices by voting for senators that are passionate about gun violence prevention, and able to not only introduce, but pass needed legislation, which Senator Bennet has proven he can do. So it's time to reelect a senator that listens to the will of the people and has the courage to just ignore the gun lobby and work to protect the community. And as Vic has said too, as gun owners, we know that the gun safety laws and the Second Amendment are not at odds. The Second Amendment can be respected and we can improve safety through this legislative process. You know, according to Gallup polls, nurses have been voted the most trusted profession for the last 20 years. And I have to go through a background check to be a nurse. So it's about time we pass universal background checks to own a gun. And Senator Bennet obviously supports that step. So therefore, I'm choosing to support Senator Bennet. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Emily, and thanks. I know nursing has not been the easiest thing to tackle the last couple of years. So thank you for being here, and thank you for doing the work you do every day. We're all indebted. Senator Bennet, sadly, your constituents have been on the front lines of some very horrendous shootings. Of course, Columbine, 1999, a shooting that happened without universal background checks. And now all those years later, as you noted, we still do not have universal background checks. Boulder, Aurora, Boulder happened, obviously, the Boulder shooting not that long ago. And I wondered if you'd like to speak to how these, how you would like to put an end or mitigate these things, and what you'd like to say about the constituents of your state.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I think the bottom line is that gun violence affects all of us, wherever it occurs. And once it affects us, it never goes away. You know, as I mentioned earlier about Columbine with my kids, every time there's one of these shootings, you can see them watching it on the TV and saying, we have to go through this again, and my children are growing up in a country unlike the one I grew up in, where they have a reasonable fear that they themselves or someone close to them could be the victim of gun violence. And I do not believe that the founders ever intended for our children to wake up every morning scared to go to school, or scared to go to a concert or the grocery store or a movie theater. They never expected that mass shootings or daily acts of gun violence would plague our communities. And as a former school superintendent, I can tell you that our kids think this is normal, and that is unacceptable to me. I think we can abide by our Constitution, be faithful to our Constitution, and keep our communities safe so everyone can live in a world free of fear and violence. And as I said last year, following the Boulder shooting that you mentioned, I'm not asking anybody to show the courage that the women of law enforcement constantly have to deal with, the inability of Congress's capacity to deal with these issues. I'm not asking for the members of Congress to show that kind of courage. I'm just asking the senators to show an ounce of courage by doing what we can to keep weapons of war out of our communities, to pass universal background checks, to limit the size of magazines, to address the epidemic crisis of mental health in this country. It seems to me, coming from a Western state that has suffered the kind of episodes that you talked about, that this is the least that we can do. And I look forward to being in the United States Senate to continue this fight. And I appreciate so much the effort that Giffords has brought to this, and to Emily and to Vic for standing up as my constituents in Colorado and helping me support them in this fight.
I think it's pretty clear that citizens of Colorado are pretty lucky to have Michael Bennet as a senator. And I'd like to acknowledge that senators just don't plop down in the office. There's a campaign that's run to put them in office. And that means there's a big campaign structure. And that means there's a lot of work to be done in very difficult races. And that means there's a campaign manager that runs all this. And Senator Bennett's campaign manager is Justin LaMorte. And I'd like to everybody, Justin is going to ask everybody on the call to help join in electing and re-electing Senator Bennet, but I'm going to turn it over to Justin now so he can explain how that can happen.
Thank you, Ryan. I agree with everything you just said, and I think Coloradans know that Michael Bennet works very hard to deliver for the state of Colorado. But we're heading into a re-election cycle where we're taking nothing for granted, and we know that in order to get Michael Bennet reelected to the United States Senate, to protect and expand our majority and to continue to make progress on the issues we care about, especially on gun safety, we need to work incredibly hard to win. So we have two asks for all of Michael's supporters on the call today. One of them is to help us organize, mobilize, and win, to volunteer for Coloradans to do the work, calling, texting, and going door to door in their communities to get the word out about the work that Michael does for Colorado and the need to send him back to Washington. The second is for them to chip in and donate. We're incredibly proud that Michael is the only senator running for re-election in 2022 who doesn't take a single dollar of campaign donations from corporate PACs or from federal lobbyists. He's the only one who's taken that pledge, and that means he's incredibly dependent on the support of grassroots donors like you. 94% of the donations to Michael's campaign in the past fundraising quarter were in small dollar amounts. So those are the two asks: to volunteer, to chip in. And if folks are able to do either or both of those things, they can go to michaelbennet.com/join today.
Thank you so much. I think it's really clear. I want to thank everybody, Emily, Vic, Justin, of course, Senator Bennet. I wondered, Senator Bennet, if you'd like to give just a closing statement, and we'll be done with the call in just a few minutes, but could you give us your closing thoughts here?
Ryan, thank you. I just want to thank Giffords again for the work that you do, for your endorsement, Gabby Giffords in particular, for her incredible commitment to the work that needs to get done. And Ryan, the gun safety issue is a perfect issue to think about, the responsibilities we all have as citizens in a democracy. There are a lot of people in the country that are worried about whether or not this democracy can actually work, whether we can come together as one people to hand something off to our kids and our grandkids that we're proud of. And I believe that we can, but it's going to take really hard work. And part of what we have to do is combat the special interests like the gun lobby that have made it impossible for us to pass the kind of common sense legislation that Giffords advocates and that I'm fighting for. And we just have to keep working. So my final message is, let's take inspiration from Gabby. We can't give up. We cannot give up in this fight because this is a fight not just for gun safety. It's a fight for our democracy, and our kids and our grandkids and are depending on us to hand them over a democracy that's stronger, not weaker than the one we inherited. And the way we're going to be able to accomplish that is through the hard work of these campaigns, but also the work that we do in between campaigns to make sure that legislation actually is moved on the Senate floor. And I'm here to tell you, it's not impossible. And Gabby was here telling us that that hard work makes you stronger. And I believe that too. I believe that about Gabby. I believe that about me. And I believe that about our democracy. So thanks for being here today. And Ryan, thank you for everything you're doing to lead this effort.
Thanks so much, Senator. Vic and Emily, thank you so much for your dedication and volunteer efforts and being here today as well. Everybody on the call, I think if you take anything away from this, it's that gun safety, responsibility, reasonable decency is on the ballot. And Senator Bennet is on that ballot to represent those things. We cannot ignore these things. We can't let our democracy wither. Gun rights responsibility is part of gun rights, and that's what Senator Bennet, that's what Giffords is fighting for. There are very big things like our democracy that we face extreme, incredible challenges, but part of that democracy is passing individual acts of decency and things like the Violence Against Women Act. So again, I want to remind everybody to text VAWA to 34131 and help us and help Senator Bennet pass this. But ultimately, we need to use our voices and our power at the ballot box. Every Coloradan does, and we have to build upon this Democratic majority. We cannot let voices like Mitch McConnell block every bit of decency and responsible action every day. So it's incredibly, incredibly important that Senator Bennet be reelected, that everybody on the call help, and that you tell your friends, and ultimately that you get out there and vote. So thank you so much. Thank you, Senator Bennet, for being here. And thank you, Senator, for being a champion for all that is good and responsible.
Thank you.